morning of August 12th, 2000, seismographs in northern Norway recorded two underwater explosions in the Barents Sea, 135 seconds apart. The first was small, the second registered 3.5 on the Richter scale, the force of a ton or two of TNT going off at once. The Russian Navy was in the middle of its largest exercise in years that weekend, and at the center of it was the pride of the Northern Fleet, a nuclear submarine called the Kursk, with 118 men aboard. By the time the rumble of the second blast faded, she was lying broken on the seabed, 108 meters down. For 2 days, Russia told no one. When officials finally did speak, almost nothing they said was true. And in the cold darkness at the stern of the wreck, 23 men were still alive. One of them, a 27-year-old officer named Dmitry Kolesnikov, had found a pen and a scrap of paper, and he was writing. The Kursk was the submarine that was never supposed to sink. She was an Oscar-class boat, 154 meters long, longer than 2 jumbo jets parked nose to tail, with 2 nuclear reactors, a double hull, and one job: killing American aircraft carriers. She carried 24 cruise missiles the size of small aircraft, and sailors called boats like her carrier killers. Commissioned in 1994 and named for the Great Tank Battle of 1943, she was among the newest and largest attack submarines on Earth, and her crews repeated a claim that had followed the class from the drawing board, that with a double hull like hers, she could survive a direct torpedo hit. The Navy she belonged to was another story. After the Soviet collapse, the fleet rusted at its moorings. Ships were stripped for parts, officers went months without pay, and exercises became rare because fuel was a luxury. Vidyayevo, the closed Arctic garrison town the Kursk sailed from, was a place of crumbling apartment blocks where the heating failed in winter. But the Kursk herself was the exception, the boat the Northern Fleet showed off. In 1999, in the wake of NATO's bombing of Yugoslavia, she slipped into the Mediterranean and spent weeks shadowing the American Sixth Fleet, and she came home to a hero's welcome. Her captain, a veteran commander named Gennady Lyachin, was reportedly put forward for the Hero of Russia star. So in August 2000, when the fleet staged its largest exercise in more than a decade, some 30 ships, led by the flagship battlecruiser Peter the Great, the Kursk had a starring role. The exercise was itself a rehearsal. That autumn, the fleet planned to send a squadron back to the Mediterranean in its biggest show of force since the Soviet era, with the Kursk in the lead. Her crew was considered among the best in the fleet, and her orders for the morning of August 12 were simple: run a mock attack on the flagship and fire a practice torpedo. She had asked for permission to fire and received it. Then she went silent. That torpedo is where this story turns. It was a Type 65, a weapon of nearly 5 tons, nicknamed the Whale, and it ran on high-test peroxide, hydrogen peroxide concentrated until it stops being an antiseptic and becomes something closer to rocket fuel. The peroxide is cheap and gives a torpedo tremendous range, but it has one catastrophic habit. The moment it touches rust, copper, or almost any impurity, it decomposes into steam and pure oxygen, expanding to thousands of times its volume in an instant. The British learned what that means in 1955, when a peroxide torpedo exploded inside the submarine HMS Sidon in Portland Harbor and killed 13 men, and the Royal Navy walked away from the fuel for good. The Russian Navy kept it because it was inexpensive and because there had never been an accident. a trust the head of the Navy would later admit had been unfounded. The practice round loaded in the Kursk's 4th torpedo tube that morning carried no warhead, only instruments. What it did carry, investigators later concluded, was a faulty weld. At 11:28 a.m., as the Kursk came up toward firing depth, peroxide seeped through that weld and met the metal it was never supposed to meet. The torpedo's fuel exploded with the force of roughly 100 kilograms of TNT, killed the men in the torpedo room, and set the compartment burning at more than 2,000 degrees. For 2 minutes and 15 seconds, the fire cooked the live torpedoes racked beside it. Then, somewhere between 5 and 7 warheads went off together. The second blast tore the bow open, collapsed the forward compartments, and registered in Norway like a small earthquake. The Kursk hit the seabed within minutes, and most of the 118 men aboard were dead before she settled. But the Kursk was built in 9 watertight compartments, and the blast wave spent itself before it reached the stern. In the turbine rooms behind the reactors, 23 men were still alive, and they did what their training told them to do. They moved aft to Compartment 9, the farthest from the fire, where there was an escape hatch. The man who took charge was Dmitry Kolesnikov, commander of the turbine group. 27 years old, a submariner's son from St. Petersburg, a big man who had married a schoolteacher named Olga just that spring. At 1:15 that afternoon, less than 2 hours after the explosions, he took out a pen and wrote in a steady, legible hand, "All personnel from sections 6, 7, and 8 have moved to section 9. There are 23 people here. We have made this decision because none of us can escape." 108 meters of Arctic water stood between the hatch above them and the surface, and they judged that no one would survive a free ascent. So they settled in to wait for rescue in a compartment with no power, with the temperature falling toward the temperature of the seabed and the air slowly going bad. 2 hours later, at 3:15 in the afternoon, he wrote again. And this time the handwriting sprawls because he was writing in total darkness. "It's dark to write," he explained, "but I'll try by feel." He put their chances at 10, maybe 20%. And then, "Regards to everybody. No need to despair. Kolesnikov." The official investigation concluded the men lived no more than 8 hours until an oxygen regeneration cartridge touched oily water and flashed over, burning the air out of the compartment. Several of the bodies were found with burns. The families, and more than a few experts, never fully accepted that timeline. On the surface, the exercise simply went on. Aboard Peter the Great, officers felt a jolt strong enough to shudder the deck of a 28,000-ton battlecruiser, and it was logged and dismissed as exercise noise. The Kursk's firing window came and went with no torpedo. Her scheduled communications check came and went with no signal. And under fleet rules, that alone meant an emergency. But it was late that night, nearly 12 hours after the explosions, before the Northern Fleet declared an alert and began to search. Early the next morning, just before 5, Peter the Great's instruments found something on the seabed. The Kursk, 135 kilometers from Severomorsk, in water only 108 meters deep. Men have been rescued from worse. What followed was 4 days of failure. The fleet's rescue submersibles had been neglected like everything else, and the Priz and Bester capsules made attempt after attempt to lock onto the 9th compartment's escape hatch, in strong currents, in worsening weather, with batteries that gave out mid-dive, and never once got a seal. Rescue ships reported tapping sounds through the water. Some said in the rhythm of an SOS, and for 2 days, that tapping was the reason to keep trying. Whether it ever came from the Kursk is disputed to this day. The official investigation concluded it did not. And in public, Russia lied. Nothing was announced until Monday, August 14th, 2 days in, when the Navy said the submarine had descended to the seabed with technical difficulties, that radio contact had been established, that air and fuel lines had been connected from the surface. None of that was true. And almost immediately, officials began suggesting the real cause was a collision with a foreign submarine, probably American. A theory the admirals would go on defending for 2 years. By then, the sinking was world news, and help was already on the table. Britain offered a rescue submersible called the LR-5, built precisely for taking survivors off a downed submarine, and Norway offered deep-sea saturation divers, men who worked North Sea oil rigs at these exact depths for a living. Moscow said no. The Kursk carried secret missiles and 2 naval reactors the fleet did not want NATO eyes anywhere near. And beyond the secrecy, there was pride. The Navy kept insisting its own capsules were on the verge of success, and that the escape hatch was too badly damaged for anyone to dock with it anyway. Not until 4 days had passed did Moscow, with President Vladimir Putin's assent, finally agree to accept foreign help. The British and Norwegian ships arrived on the 19th. On the 20th, the Norwegian divers went down and found the hatch the fleet had called too damaged to use. It was intact. On the morning of August 21st, they cranked it open, something the entire Northern Fleet had failed to do in a week. And it took them about a day from arriving at the wreck. Even getting to that point had taken negotiation over where the divers could work, what they were allowed to see, which parts of the wreck were off limits, while the weather worsened and the hours ran out. The airlock beneath the hatch was flooded. When they opened the inner hatch, Compartment 9 was full of water. That evening, the Northern Fleet announced that all 118 men were dead. On television, the fleet commander, Admiral Vyacheslav Popov, pulled off his cap and asked the families of his sailors to forgive him for not saving their men. It was the only apology anyone in uniform ever offered, and it came from the man whose fleet had spent 4 days refusing the divers who opened the hatch in one. While the fleet briefed and stalled, the families were converging on Vidyayevo. On August 18, Deputy Prime Minister Ilya Klebanov sat in the garrison's House of Officers, facing hundreds of wives and mothers, and a woman named Nadezhda Tilek, the mother of Sergei Tilek, one of the Kursk's young officers, rose and screamed her grief at him. While she was still shouting, a nurse came up behind her and injected a sedative straight through her coat. She slumped mid-sentence and was carried out. A television camera caught all of it, and the footage went around the world. The Russian state, faced with a grieving mother, reaching for a syringe. Officials later said the injection was a heart medication given at her husband's request. She said she was silenced. Putin had been president for barely 100 days when the Kursk went down, and he spent the first 5 days of the disaster where the news found him, on vacation at a Black Sea resort in Sochi. He later argued that flying north would only have gotten in the rescuers' way, and there is a version of that argument that is even reasonable. But the country watched its new president stay at the beach while 118 sailors lay on the bottom of the Barents Sea. On August 22nd, he finally came to Vidyayevo and met the families behind closed doors for more than 6 hours, stretching past midnight. By the accounts that leaked out, they shouted at him, and he answered by attacking the television coverage. The people on TV, he insisted, were lying. In early September, on American television, Larry King asked him what had happened to the submarine. Putin let the corner of his mouth turn up and gave a two-word answer. It sank. That October, Russian and Norwegian divers cut into the wreck and brought out 12 bodies. Dmitry Kalashnikov was recovered on October 25th with the note still folded in his pocket. And when the fleet made its contents public, the effect in Russia was electric. Here, in a dead man's handwriting, was proof that the Navy's early claim that everyone died instantly had been false. A year later, a Dutch salvage consortium lifted the hull off the seabed, minus the shattered bow, and towed it into dry dock. And 115 of the 118 men eventually came home. 3 never did. In the summer of 2002, the prosecutor general closed the case. The cause was the faulty weld and the peroxide, and the 133 volumes of investigation were distilled into a summary that spoke of negligence, incompetence, and mismanagement. And no one was ever charged with anything. Putin drew his own conclusion. Within a year, the television networks whose coverage had enraged him were in the hands of the state and its allies. The Kursk's sail was cut from the wreck, and it stands in Murmansk today as a memorial. Kalashnikov is buried in St. Petersburg, beside a stone that carries the words "Russia remembers him" by, the last line he wrote in the dark to everyone he was leaving behind. No need to despair.